1970s. The automobile age is booming, but road safety looks very different. Seatbelts are only an option. Few people have heard of children's car seats, and children play in the back seat while driving. What did it threaten, and how did we arrive at modern safety standards? Seatbelts first appeared in the 1950s, but in the 70s, they were still not mandatory in many countries. People underestimated their importance, believing them to be inconvenient or even dangerous during an accident. In the 1970s, child car seats were not yet common. Instead, children often played in the back seat or stood between the front seats, with no protection during sudden braking or an accident. For children of the 70s, a car ride was an adventure. Peeking through the hatch or playing around in the back seat seemed normal. However, such entertainment often ended in injuries. Roads have become faster and cars have become more powerful, but at the same time, safety standards lagged behind. Most of the accidents had serious consequences due to the lack of basic protection. In the 70s, cars were not yet equipped with airbags. The first models with this technology appeared at the end of the decade, but mass use was still a long way off. In the 1970s, the road death rate was much higher than it is today. More than 50,000 people died every year in the USA alone. This prompted society to think about improving security. In the 70s, people felt safer in cars than they actually were. Soft seats and thick doors created the illusion of security, but without seatbelts and seats, it was just an illusion. It was in the 70s that car companies began to conduct the first crash tests to assess the level of passenger protection. These studies are an important step towards creating safer cars. In the mid-70s, some countries began to introduce laws mandating the use of seatbelts. It was not an easy step because many people found them inconvenient or unnecessary. The government and automakers have begun to actively use the media to promote safety. Advertising campaigns emphasize the importance of seatbelts and careful driving. In the 1970s, the first models of children's car seats appeared. Although they were uncomfortable and bulky, their use significantly reduced the risk of injury during accidents. In the 70s, you could often see cars full of people. Without seatbelts and restrictions on the number of passengers, it was even more dangerous. In response to high road deaths, governments and car companies have started to develop new standards. They related not only to belts, but also to strengthening the body of cars. Drunken driving remained a serious problem in the 1970s. Only later did campaigns appear that made society aware of the consequences of such behavior. In the 70s, cars did not have special safety zones that would absorb the impact. This often resulted in serious injuries even in minor accidents. Convertibles popular in the 70s added style, but did little to protect passengers during accidents. The lack of a roof or roll bars significantly increased the risk of injury, and the use of seat belts in such cars was often ignored. In the 70s, large trucks and SUVs had almost no passenger safety standards. These vehicles were designed to transport goods, not to protect people. This made them especially dangerous during head-on collisions. In the 1970s, speed limits on many roads were not strict enough, and powerful cars contributed to exceeding them. This often resulted in serious accidents because the passengers were not properly protected. Car interiors of the 70s were often made of hard and dangerous materials. Metal handles, sharp edges of the control panel, and even seat fasteners during accidents caused injuries. The braking systems of the 70s were far from perfect. The lack of anti-lock braking systems, ABS, often caused the car to slide uncontrollably during emergency braking. Children in the 70s often played near open car windows, creating an additional risk. Falling out of a window or being hit by a stream of air at speed could have tragic consequences. At the end of the 70s, car manufacturers began to introduce elements of passive safety. This included crumple zones in the body to absorb impact energy and improved seatbelt anchorages. Medical research in the 1970s showed exactly what kind of injuries passengers without seatbelts get. These data became the basis for the development of new car safety standards. In the 1970s, automakers began experimenting with child seats. These models were still far from ideal, but they were the first step towards creating modern safety standards for children. The hazard warning system, which is mandatory in every car today, only began to be implemented in the 70s. This simple feature has helped prevent many accidents. In the 70s, public organizations began to actively put pressure on car manufacturers, demanding better safety. It is because of this that the first strict standards for all new cars appeared.